Hello, everyone. We'll be starting soon with our tech panel, a conversation on building and scaling tech ventures, just in a couple of minutes.
Hi.
Hello, Harsh. Hello, Aakrit.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
Hi,
having
guys.
me. Hey, Aakrit, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. Trying to make my team before the deadline hits so that the deadline is going to hit while we're in the panel.
Hopefully, you'll get
Is the week one madness past now?
The week one madness is just like a 9-week madness session for IPL, man. But yeah, we're pretty. After week one, we do calm down a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Rohit as well. Hi, Rohit.
And hey, Harsh. Yeah, Aakrit.
How are you?
I'm good to finally meet you.
Yes, absolutely. In person.
So let's get started then. Before we just get started, I just want to say hello to all our audience as well, and welcome again to all of them, all our attendees who are joining us in person from Columbia Business School in New York, and also everyone joining remotely over Zoom. We're obviously very excited to have three exceptional entrepreneurs to have this panel discussion on building and scaling tech ventures in India. But just before we begin, very quickly, a few housekeeping items. We'll try and keep the conversation to around 40 minutes and then leave a little bit time towards the end for audience Q&A. Feel free to keep adding questions in the Q&A box, and we'll also take the submitted questions that we have. With that, let me just set the stage for this discussion and introduce our speakers as well. So for me, the conversation on building and scaling tech ventures ties very well with the conference theme this year, which is Limitless India. Indian tech ventures are fast becoming, the champions of India Inc.'s growth story, and they're driving both significant economic and societal change. And to actually speak to us about the current state and also the future potential of this Indian ecosystem, we have our three founders here, Harsh, Aakrit, and Rohit. Let me quickly introduce them to you as well and their companies. So Aakrit is the co-founder and CEO of Haptik. Haptik is one of the world's largest conversational AI companies, having reached more than 100 million devices, over 2 billion conversations processed. And the company builds intelligent virtual assistant solutions that enable brands globally to enhance their customer experience. In 2019, Haptik became a part of Jio Platforms, a $65 billion internet conglomerate that reaches over 500 million consumers. So thank you, Aakrit, for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Next, we move on to Harsh, who is an alumnus of Columbia Business School. So very happy to have you from the class of 2014. Harsh is the CEO and co-founder of Dream 11 and Dream Sports. Dream Sports is India's largest sports technology company with over 140 million users across brands such as Dream 11, Fanco, Dream Capital, Dream Set Go, Dream Pay, and the Dream Sports Foundation. Dream 11, the flagship company within the group, is the world's largest fantasy sports platform. It has more than 120 million users playing fantasy cricket, soccer, basketball, football, baseball, and so many other sports. So thank you, Harsh. We're very excited to have you back to Columbia, but in a slightly different setting than what you experienced probably.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
And then we have Rohit, who's the co-founder of Darwinbox, which is a fast-growing cloud-based HR tech platform. Darwinbox caters to all the HR needs across an organization's entire employee lifecycle. And the company recently tripled its valuation to become a unicorn on the back of rapid revenue growth over the past year. Darwinbox has over 650 customers, over 1.5 million users using its platform over 90 plus countries. So thank you, Rohit, for joining us, and also congratulations on the recent fundraise.
Thank you, Anand. Pleasure to be here.
And lastly, I'm Anand Mukim, a second-year MBA student, possibly can be termed as a recovering entrepreneur. I'm not sure what that exactly means, but I think I qualify. And I'll be the moderator for this session. I want to try and break this conversation up into sort of three pieces. And I want to start with your personal journeys initially. Each of you have sort of defied conventional wisdom and launched ventures in in non-obvious opportunities. And I would love for you to share, why did you decide entrepreneurship is the path you want to take, and how did you identify the specific opportunity? Perhaps maybe we can start with you, Aakrit. What prompted your move from the US as an undergrad student to then come to India and start a company in a space which was very nascent at the time? Not many companies globally were even working in the conversational AI space then.
Yeah. So for me, I used to work at a company in the Bay Area where we provided sort of software as a service analytics tools to other app developers. And a large cohort of our customers used to be applications. So for example, a company like WhatsApp would use our products, in the company that I used to work for. So over there, I saw a fairly sharp increase in growth in the way that people were using just, chat apps, messaging apps, conversational sort of interfaces and so on. And this was also the time when, kind of Google was coming out with Google Home, Alexa was becoming popular and so on. This is about 9 or 10 years back. And that got me thinking that, look, if you and I can speak, let's say on WhatsApp as a channel, it should be as easy for a consumer to talk to a business and have a similar conversation, whether it is for customer support or whether it is for inquiring about a product purchase or so on. So that's basically where this whole thought of trying to build, this kind of consumer to business messaging, chat bot, whatever you want to call it, started. Honestly, we didn't think so much of AI. We didn't think so much at that time of virtual assistant and all the cool things that we like to call ourselves today. It was more just like, look, this should exist and it makes sense. And it also felt like it'll be an emerging market opportunity first, which is when sort of India played a big role. And that's what prompted me to with this company and this idea. In general, entrepreneurship, I think for me was, I always felt I wanted to do something, build a company, a sort of large mandate, take a large market and go after it. I had started a couple of sort of side companies while I was, in my previous job as well as in college. But there's nothing, of course, like running a full-time company and starting up ground up. So that was a whole different learning experience. But really, that's where the inception and the idea came from. And then, we moved and we built a number of different products. We failed a lot and then finally arrived at what Haptik is today.
No, thank you for that. I think it's very fascinating. A couple of points that you mentioned, right? The failing piece that you just mentioned right now, we'll probably touch upon that, and also the how India kind of played into your decision to start this company and at the timing that you probably did as well. So we'll try and definitely go deeper onto those as well. Maybe before that, we can move to you, Harsh, and just to understand, you started Dream11 in 2008. I don't think anybody was really thinking about starting a fantasy sports platform in India at that point. Also, you're probably very young at that point, maybe around 22 or so, and just would love to hear about what prompted this decision to go down this path.
Sure. So I went to Seven Oaks for high school after my 10th standard in India. I was always a big Manchester United fan, still am, despite the last 10 years, and will always be. When I went to London for high school, I discovered this thing called fantasy football. I'm sure there are some FPL guys out here, and fell in love with it and continued to play it through my undergrad in UPenn. So I did undergrad in UPenn engineering and then came back home. And but FPL, Fantasy Premier League, was a way I stayed in touch with all my friends back home over the 6 years I was abroad. And that's when IPL was launching. And so I said, let's go play fantasy cricket. And there was none. And that was crazy, having lived in the US and UK for 6 years and knowing how an integral part fantasy sports is to the sports fan, and how for 1 billion cricket fans, fantasy sports doesn't exist, didn't make sense. So I said, chalo, let's put some of the engineering, degree to some use. And I asked my friends who wanted to start, and only one of them was silly enough to join me. And both of us jumped into launching Dream11. Terrible idea. We launched a season-long, free-to-play, ad-driven business model. Failed miserably for 4 years. Pivoted 100 times along the way. And then in 2012, we launched this new, pivot, which was freemium single match fantasy sports. And that started clicking. And I said, wait a minute, to run this successfully, I actually need to know what's debit and credit and what's accounts receivable and accounts payable. And I just needed to understand the basics of finance, I felt. And that's when I said that, okay, for fantasy sports, we're not going to be able to raise money in India, VC money in India, because fantasy sports doesn't exist as a category. So I went to the US, I applied to Columbia and got in. I went to do my MBA there. So I learned about finance, took all the entrepreneurship classes I could take at CBS. Half my classes, I think, were VC, VC and entrepreneurial classes at CBS. Learned a lot about the process, learned about why for the next 2 years while at CBS, why 150 pitches across the West Coast and East Coast told me, no, we're not going to fund you, go back to India and raise money. Finally went back to India in 2014 with my CBS degree in hand, raised money in India for our Series A. At that time, we had about 300,000 users. And, long story short, fast forward about 7 years later, we have 140 million users and are doing a lot more than fantasy sports today.
Yeah, that's such an amazing journey in and of itself, right? And I think it's like a lot of times, a lot of us who are looking at entrepreneurs who've been successful, we forget to see what all the persistence and the pivoting that has happened in all the years prior to that, to be then having this product that has achieved in a truly real way product market fit, right? So I think we'll try and delve a little deeper into those pieces as well, and also the venture raising side as well, because that's also an interesting conversation to have for young entrepreneurs and student entrepreneurs who are trying to go down that same path right now. With that, maybe Rohit, we can come to you. You also have completed an MBA from IIM Lucknow. You went into consulting, as a lot of people, a lot of my peers and a lot of people in business school are going into. And a few years into consulting, you started a company within the HR tech space, which is dominated by these large players like SAP and Oracle. And it just doesn't seem like an obvious opportunity to most. You think that it's a solved opportunity. So why HR tech? Why even go into entrepreneurship after a good path in consulting already?
Yeah, so I think for me, Anand, I had two past lives. One was in consulting, which was in McKinsey, and prior to MBA was in Google. Right. And what consulting does, of course, is exposes you to a lot of companies, right? Like you start working with a lot of companies closely, understand what they're up to, get deeper into finance, accounts receivable, all of those, right? Like it's a good place to learn a lot of these things firsthand without being burnt in a way. But one of the things that I realized was most of these companies, and I was at Google about 7 years before I was in consulting. So most of these places had like really shitty products that they were using, right? Like, and technology had moved so much from when I was at Google to when I was at McKinsey, and still the products were really, really bad. So I mean, it felt like there should be a reason behind this, right? I mean, and I couldn't just fathom why that was not happening. And when I dug deeper, we looked at different parts of the functions, etc. HR tech was one interesting place because this is one system of record, right? Like any organization has 3 systems of record. One is of your finance, which is your accounting software. One is of your customers, which is your CRM, and one is of your people, which is the HRMS. This is one system which everybody in the org uses. Right. And when you try to put that together, saying from the CEO to the last intern, there is a system everybody uses, and it's been relegated to be a database, it felt wrong, right? Like, and that's where the idea of Darwinbox came about. We wanted to build something which is loved by people because they're using it day in and a day out, right? And it's not just a database, because just imagine the power. And this was not a time when right, SaaS was so hot. This was 2015 in India, where it was not that hot. We just thought, hey, we'll solve this problem. We know clearly what the problem is, because I mean, everybody says they hate what systems they're using, right? And we thought we could just solve. And then we realized what it takes to build an enterprise product, right? The day one, I mean, most companies say, why should I take you? What if you shut down, right? Like, and everybody in all the employees in my organization are using you, and suddenly if you shut down, what will happen? And then you go to the next investors story, and everybody's like, oh, you want to build an enterprise product out of Asia? Do you even know how much big the market is, etc.? We didn't think about all of those, right? We just said, hey, we wanted to solve a problem. We clearly saw that people were ready to pay if we solve a problem, and we just went about doing that. And I think in the journey of doing this, we also learned a lot in terms of what sticks, what doesn't stick with enterprises, how to sell, etc., right? And how to sell against an SAP, Oracle, or a Workday, which have been around for 20 years, right? The good thing is the technology shifts, right? Like every 10 years, there is a huge leap in terms of technology. I think it's about how do we go to market, which became a lot more critical while we built out a great product in terms of winning each of these markets as you expand globally, competing with the likes of SAP, Oracle, which have which probably are 100x the size of us in terms of the number of people they have. But being at it and solving for that, replacing them. So initially you just get a chance. Second, then you start competing and winning. Then you replace. Then you build a formidable position saying, hey, oh, you are a contender when we want to look at HR tech. Right. So that's been a journey in itself. I think the other part that really worked for us is because we were enterprise facing in a way, right? Me and my co-founders, one of them, the other two, one of them was a banker, the other was a HR consultant. We understood enterprises. At least we know how to deal with them. That really helped us navigate this. I've seen a lot of companies where you've not dealt with, or you've done a B2C company and suddenly try a B2B, and there's a big shift or a learning that's there, or the opposite, right? Like if we did an SME product or if we did a B2C company, our learning would be longer in terms of getting to the answers, but probably some part of it was taken care of where we've dealt with enterprises and we just needed to build a great product and make sure that we're trusted, right? And in systems of record, being trusted is extremely important. That's been the journey, and it's a long way to go still in terms of being trusted in all parts of the world as well. So
no, that's very fascinating. And also I think so many things that you mentioned, you started at a time when enterprise SaaS was not that big in India, and to actually take that and still go through all the trials and tribulations of the resistance that companies will have to adopt a startup solution, I think is very fascinating. And I think Aakrit also mentioned about the India advantage, and I want to come back to you as well on this. But maybe Harsh, we start with you on why start with India, right? Why build it for cricket? Because you mentioned that you're a soccer fan, a football fan, an EPL fan, and why choose to come back to India and build this for cricket? Or what is the India advantage according to you that enables the success of companies like yours?
Well, I think despite being a football fan, soccer, right, fan, but I think in India, if you're building in India, you have to start with cricket, right? I'm also a cricket fan. I'm also a big cricket fan. So Manchester United, the Indian team, the Mumbai Indians, who's playing right now, actually. I'm a big fan of sports in general. But in India, you have to know that 90% of the market share of all sports, sometimes 95, 99% is cricket or was cricket. Today, other sports are starting to pick up, but you have to go after the low-hanging fruit. And that's what got us started out. We looked for a fantasy cricket game for IPL because there's already a good fantasy football game. And so we went after the need. We didn't go after just purely what we wanted, but the need based on what we were looking for. And we felt like if we had this problem, then 100 million other Indians could have the same problem. And that's what we went to solve. So I think we're big believers in solving a product need, finding a gap which you're deeply passionate about personally. And you can't go to sleep because you're thinking about the problem. You can't wait to jump on it because you feel like someone else is going to grab it if you don't now. I mean, that's the kind of fire you have to launch a company which everyone's going to say is a really stupid idea. For most of the entrepreneurs out there, right? Yeah. Most of the time people will say, why don't you just join, stay at a job or do this on the side or, do it part-time. And sometimes that's good, but most of the best ideas are executed because you give your all to it, right? You jump into it all in. And I think that's very important. I think in terms of building for India, in India, I think we have the largest competitive advantage as a country of having a billion captive audience, right? Users. If you go to Europe, for example, and if you launch, if you're an entrepreneur in Switzerland or, Norway or Finland or Sweden, and I mean, companies like Spotify have come out from there, right? But at the same time, they have to immediately launch globally. And that comes with a lot of growing pains. India has this amazing ability to just build for India. And you can build decacons out of India just by serving the Indian market because you have a billion digital users today. So I think that honestly is our biggest advantage of building in India for India.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of just the population advantage we have with the digitization that's happened over the recent years. I think that's certainly enabled a lot of this to really explode in a way where we probably haven't seen before, and other regions, probably other countries, don't necessarily have that same advantage going on.
That's right, and that's why you see like India, China, and USA have the most amount of startups because they're successful startups because their local population is so large that for India, that population is now our biggest advantage.
Yeah. And I also want to definitely reiterate a point that you made there, which is that you need to take, as an entrepreneur, a problem-solving approach, right? Not a solution-based approach where you get married to a solution and you're chasing after that. It's really that you're chasing after a problem and you're passionate about that problem, irrespective of what might take to solve that problem. So I think that's also a very important point that everyone should understand. And with that, I'll also move to Aakrit right now, because sort of a similar point that Harsh was making, which is having that large captive user base. It's something that you've likely experienced in your work at Haptik, and especially most recently with the MyGov Corona helpline that you build. It's just that the India advantage in terms of scale definitely exists, and you see that play out in very fascinating ways.
Yeah. So look, in our case, there were sort of 3-4 different dynamics that were playing into like building in India, right? So first, a little similar to kind of Dream11 or Harsh's case, where back to when I said when I found this problem, it was a problem that look messaging or chat, like it's going to explode. And the country that was leading this explosion was India, with all our favorite app called WhatsApp, right? So and there was some fascinating statistics back then, which is even bigger now, which is, WhatsApp is used more on your phone than all other apps combined, including the phone call itself, right? So this whole idea that, look, India is leading this. Now, of course, there is a large similar popular app in China called WeChat, but for various reasons, China is difficult for outsiders to come in and do business and grow it. And it just felt like we didn't understand the market. And there was no disproportionate advantage we could have, given that I grew up in India and given that I was familiar with the market and I knew people. It also, along with the problem, you also have to think about why you, right? Why will you win versus like 10 other people? And it felt like, having that sort of know-how a little bit about India helped. So the product or the market for what we were trying to build seemed like India was a better fit to start with. I think the second was that in general, right, when you think about SaaS, back in the day, 7 or 8 years back, there was no concept of ever building an India-based SaaS company, right? It was always like build in India for the world. So you would have, developers here, you would have a team here, and you would use clever sort of business model pricing sort of ways to kind of get business products everywhere else or get customers everywhere else. We felt like that was going to change, or that is evolving over a period of time. If you think about it, the rise of consumer internet in India, which means that there are large companies like Dream11 and others who now need software to run their businesses, right? And shameless plug, Dream11 is a Haptik customer. So anybody, if references, Harsh can talk about it. But
Haptik customer.
Yeah. So we also saw that there was this wave happening where you could build out maybe not $1 billion business to start with, but definitely there was appetite to get to $1 million of software revenue in this part of the world. So those were 2-3 reasons. And then, back to like what everybody talks about, right? we were so married to figuring out this and solution to the problem that we felt that the market will emerge eventually. Whether we'll go back to the US to sell or whether we will expand to more emerging markets like Southeast Asia or others, we didn't think so much at that time that, look, what's going to happen in 2020, right? What if we cap out in India and so on? It just felt like if we solve this really, really well, like I feel like this whole idea of TAM is slightly, we overestimate, we overdo the whole TAM question in our head. I think that if you're solving a problem really, really well, eventually markets emerge, and sometimes you end up creating those markets. So in our case, we felt like if we solve it really well here, we get our initial few customers, eventually there'll be enough of a market. And yeah, now the last 2 or 3 years, most of our effort is being spent towards global expansion, which means we are now actively doing business in the US, Southeast Asia, and many other parts of the world. And that because the solutions are also emerging and the product market fit is emerging for those countries as well.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting as well. And the whole piece of the puzzle that's almost super important here is to make sure that it's what the problem is, like you said, and then also marrying as to why you can solve it, and then figuring out, okay, you need to take that iterative approach of continuously solving that problem, and then eventually your hypothesis is that the market will emerge out of it, and to not focus that much on the TAM initially when you're going after it, but rather focus again, like Harsh was also mentioning, which is focus on that problem and try and solve that, and the market will kind of make way for you and create that, sort of a category defining company in some sense. And you also mentioned something interesting about, building in India for the world. And with that, I actually want to go to Rohit and take his views, because at that point, when you were building an HR tech platform, companies at that point, enterprise SaaS ones like maybe Zoho or Freshworks, they were building from India, but they were building focused on for the world. Whereas Darwinbox has taken a slightly different approach, which is almost contrary in the sense that you're building for India and Southeast Asia first, and then you're going to gradually expand outward. What kind of prompted that decision? Why take that bet on the Southeast Asian market?
Yeah, so I think maybe I'll quickly talk about India, and then I'll talk about why we took Southeast Asia as a choice, right? I think for us, like Aakrit said, we saw the problem and we were trying to just solve it, right? Like we saw it in enough places in our reach in terms of enterprises in India, and we knew that there is specifically a problem that we needed to solve here, and we can solve it. We're capable of solving it, and we solved for it, right? And that led to building out Darwinbox. The good thing about India, it's a tough market, right? Because you have a ton of engineers who are ready to build stuff in every enterprise, right? So you're not, I mean, the buying teams are never happy with what's available, with you, right? Like you always need to do more. What that did is pulled out the guts of us, the product, and said, build it in a way where it's super flexible for everybody to use. So what that led to is making the product very robust very early on when we were selling in India. And then when we started looking beyond India, and then as the markets grew and as the product was more robust as well, we looked at which are the markets which have similar market conditions, right? Interestingly enough, HR is a function which is very culturally sensitive, right? Like you can't have best practices of the West working everywhere else in the world, right? So and that's what we saw as a gap in the Asian enterprises where the SAPs, Oracles, or Workdays were trying to sell, where they came in and said, hey, why don't you change your process, because this is best practice globally and you need to change it. And what that led to is, because it was culturally insensitive in one way or the other, right? Those things were not adopted. So product was bought, but they were not adopted. People had to change process, which failed, etc. So I think in terms of market condition, which is low cloud penetration, mostly predominantly international players playing in the enterprise space, no local in a way, right? So the market construct or the market schematic was very similar to India in Southeast Asia and Middle East, which is the two markets we are present in, which is the next two markets we went into. What it obviously helped us is build out a product that's a lot more robust and configurable now, which we can take it to the rest of the world as well. So it was more organic. It was not like super planned on, like in a way where we said, oh, this is step 2, this is step 3 for us. We just solved for India, which was the immediate step for us. The other advantage we have as a country, right, India for the world, is IT services, right? And is an industry which I think India has done fantastically well globally over the last 3 decades, right? And if you look at it closely, it's basically using technology to solve problems, right? It was done on premise, it is done in services. Today, the problem is solved differently because there is a leap shift in technology where cloud products are solving for some of those use cases, right? Whether you take it as communication, whether you take it as automation, whether you take it as analytics, etc. The problems remain the same. The way you solve for them gets better and better, whether it is cloud, whether it is conversational, whether it is any other form, right? AI, Web3, whichever is the answer, right? And because we as a country have a lot of professionals who've solved for the world, they understand the problem statements of the world, right? We just had to make sure that we build out products, which is a new learning for the country as such, right? Enterprise products. But the part of servicing these customers, understanding the problems, selling to them, etc., was already there, and that was a huge advantage for us as well, right? Like when we went global. So that was a natural advantage we had because of the geography, and of course, right, like efficiencies are better because your pricing is subdued in this part of the world, which makes you more efficient in terms of how you service, which we can extend it to the world and you get better at.
Yeah, no, that again, like you just mentioned it towards the end, it's that low cost advantage that you end up building just because you're building in India, and the cost that's available to you in terms of the amount people are willing to pay for the service in India might be much lower. That just enables you to be more efficient with your service and with your platform itself, and with the business offering that you're bringing out. And let me just actually come to that point, and let's stick with you, Rohit, on this. When you're building for India now, you are obviously customizing for the Indian market. So with Darwinbox, I believe it was taking a big mobile first approach as well, in addition to the regular desktop based service that others might have been providing already before that. So in terms of when you're thinking about going globally and where consumer behavior is very different compared to what it is in India, what are some challenges that you're facing as a company, and what do you feel are the biggest factors that are hindrances or barriers as you try and compete on a global level?
Yeah, I think the biggest factor, right, and that you mentioned mobile, etc., right? Like, so there are behavioral elements which companies have in terms of countries, etc., right? Because they're more web centric or mobile centric, or they've only started using enterprise products on mobile, and that was the case that we made for Darwinbox when we did Asia, right? Because there are a large part of the workforce who never used a laptop. Right, you take the field force, you take the shop floor workers, you take the retail employees. None of them have used a laptop, or they don't have an email ID. They just log in through their mobile and like mark their attendance or this thing, right? So as we move from one country to another, I think at least we had the ambition of global. So we built the configurability in the product, which solves for large parts of the market. What we faced as a challenge, of course, was the go-to-market side. Right, and I mean, I think the part where we had to learn is how do you land in countries, right? And for that you get a lot of learnings, right? There are enough people who say move people from here, there into the new market, etc. That didn't work for us. Where we said we'd move our best people there. What worked for us, Anant, was more have local teams everywhere we are. So all customer facing teams of ours, right? Whether you take a Jakarta or a Manila or a Singapore or a Dubai, right? Or a Bangkok, or now in the US, right? All customer facing teams are locally present. What we are taking advantage of is the central product engineering marketing teams, which is functioning out of one area. But what we are trying to do is we're bringing in the local flavor in terms of the customer facing role, where the understanding of the product, the configuring of the product, the sale of the product is happening there locally, right? And that's been a journey or a learning in itself. And each country is different that way, right? Like you'll have local compliances. So there is some bit of a build that is there on the product. But beyond that, I think the bigger part of scaling is how do you feel local, right? Like how do you make sure that the person who's coming to you is talking your language, right? Like And HR as a function, again, is everybody has a point of view on it, right? So the person who's coming to you is talking your language, your local problems, right? Like whether it is in terms of what the COVID rules are in that country, to what are the resignation rules in the country, to whatever that is, right? What are the data rules in that country? So having local teams, of course, helped. And I think given how COVID has brought the whole world to be easily communicable through in terms of the last 2 years, right? So that actually helped us build out new geographies very quickly. It helped us expand. But I think the other thing is understanding the competitor landscape, etc., which is just a problem that you need specifically solve because different competitions in different places. But otherwise, I think the GTM motion and having local teams is where initially we faced the challenge. Now I think we have a playbook which works much better.
Yeah, and that localization piece can sometimes work out very critically. And with that, I want to actually get Harsh's view on this as well, because Harsh, as you expand into other sports, which are not necessarily India centric, how are you thinking about making sure that Dream 11 is considered as a global fantasy sports platform across no matter which sport you want to play?
Right. So look, we always started as wanting to do fantasy cricket and fantasy football. And then, Kabaddi's become a very large sport in India as well now with PKL. And then we just felt that we need to be more diverse as a sports fan base. With 1 billion sports fans, we're still all focusing on 100 matches a year. That's it. That's how much the Indian national cricket team players play, really, the men's cricket. They play about now 74 matches of IPL and about 30 odd games between all the bilaterals and ICC events. Dream 11 today hosts about 12,000 matches on its platform. That's about 40 matches, 400 matches a month, and about over 10 matches a day. And so there's a lot of depth in cricket and breadth in other sports that we've been able to showcase to our users. But Indian cricket still becomes the acquisition funnel, right? People still come to play for Indian cricket, but they stay to check out other matches. So I think that's been an important strategy for us, that we can upsell fans more depth in cricket and more breadth in sports once they come in for the India cricket matches. Having said that, we've now also tried to evolve the company after being around for 12 years. In the last 2 years, of our 14-year journey, we had reached about 100 million users. And so we said, okay, now can we convert this high frequency 100 million user base from a product to a platform? Can we give them much more, and can we solve many more problems in sports in India? For example, in the US, if you see, there's a fanatic for sports commerce, right? There is, Opta or bunch of these companies for sports data. There's a bunch of them for sports experiences. There's some of them coming up in AR, VR, sports content, obviously, and OTT has a bunch of them. And there's multiple multi-billion dollar companies in each vertical in sports. India has none of that. And so we now took our 100 million user base and said, we now have another app called FanCode, which does sports OTT and sports commerce and sports content. We have one which is Dream Set Go, which does sports travel and experiences. We have Dream Game Studios, which is trying to create cricket games where there are none. There's no Madden or FIFA, right, in cricket. We've also invested in companies like Elevar, which creates sports sneakers, Fitter for fitness, So Strong for esports, and Kelomore for playing sports on AstroTurf on offline. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a much larger sports universe for India using Dream 11 as a product to convert it to a platform.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting journey as well, because you now start being able to sort of capture the entire ecosystem of problems that a sports fan might have, and the troubles that they might have across different phases, right? So maybe it's from playing games to just being able to buy the merchandise they want to buy, to be able to get the information they want from like the sports that they enjoy as well. So there's so many problems that.
And of course, you can't forget the hot buzzword around everywhere. Yes, we are also investing in sports NFTs.
Yeah.
And nobody can get by like talking about expansion today without talking about Web3, right?
Yeah, I think so. One of the most frequently asked, like the pre-submitted questions, is all about how you guys think about Web3 and the crypto space, and what does it mean for individual companies as well. And we'll see. We'll try and get to that as well. But before that, Aakrit, I also want to come to you about your global expansion plans. I know a few years ago you acquired a company in the US. Are you also adapting a similar approach as what Rohit mentioned, which is trying to localize for each region and building local teams there? What are some of the biggest challenges you're facing as you're scaling your business right now?
Yeah, that acquisition was a terrible idea, by the way. So that didn't work out. I think one of the lessons from that was that you cannot, when you're expanding, particularly to the US, no amount of capital can cut short the problem. I think one big lesson was that markets like those require you to kind of build it ground up, rethink a lot of aspects. To answer your question specifically, yeah, so what are we doing? I think one learning for us has been that at least in SaaS, depending on the price point you are selling, your go-to-market changes. So if let's say your price point is under $20,000 a year, then you can do it from here. You can actually close business from here, which goes back to your Freshwork, Zoho examples. You can build a large sort of team here and have a very small local team. I think the moment you start going above that, especially if you start hitting $50,000 a year and above, you cannot do it without having local presence. I'm now referring to North America. It requires a different to be very close to the customer, to culturally be a very attuned to sort of the same wavelength that they have, build a relationship, know the inner workings of companies and so on, right? Because at that price point or above, for that matter, it becomes a sort of enterprise sales cycle from that perspective. So yes, so we are doing a little bit of both, right? So we cater to both smallish / what is typically referred to as low to mid-market customers, and we cater to larger enterprise. So our mid-market or SMB segment, we are building out most of our go-to-market teams in India for the world. So we will, except where of course local language is required, like some places that we'll have to staff locally. But otherwise for those, we are building it out from India. Our enterprise teams are all local. And to Rohit's point, that includes not necessarily just sales, but other aspects also. Sales, account management, marketing, implementation and professional services. All of those are going to be local. And we are thinking of it as almost like 3 hubs in our head: North America, sort of India, and then Southeast Asia. India can cover parts of kind of Middle East. India can also cover parts of Europe for now, and then Southeast is its own sort of different go-to-market, and then the US is different. So as far as, and finally, as the product or the platform is concerned, well, the beauty of SaaS is if you build it well foundationally, then the only way you'll scale is if that remains consistent no matter where you go, right? If you have to start making fundamental changes to your product and platform for each market, then it becomes very hard to really scale and make that case. So at least for us, we're trying to keep that layer consistent no matter which market we operate in.
No, that makes sense. And that again goes back to something that Rohit was also mentioning. It's having that robustness built into the platform so that you can actually scale to different regions as you're moving forward. At least from a platform perspective, the platform should be capable of being able to do so. With this, actually, let me start moving to the audience Q&A as well. I know one of the things is Web3 and crypto, but maybe let's start with that actually. So Harsh, maybe tell me what you're thinking about in terms of Web3, NFT, crypto. What you've also started an investment arm as well within Dream11. Is this an area of focus from an investment perspective solely, or is it also a business perspective? What are your thoughts on the space right now?
So let me start with a polarizing answer, right? I believe that Web3 is, if not the future of, potentially the internet, but a very, very large part to play in our future, right? So I believe it's here to stay, and there's going to be a fundamental and tectonic shift in our tech industry because of Web3 and its applications, right? On the other hand, I also believe people are going batshit crazy, if you may, about the impact it has today. It has very little to prove for, except for speculative value today. Today, the entire, whether it's crypto, whether it's sports NFTs, for example, sports NFTs are supposed to be entirely driven by utility. If you look at Axie, if you look at Dapper, if you look at a bunch of these things, right? NFTs are largely today driven by speculation. And you can see that with the upswings, right? Like the value goes extremely high and then plummets off a cliff extremely low, right? And that's not the way that Web3 is supposed to be built out. I'm not saying it's the creator's fault. I'm saying it's the retail market that's trying to speculate, saying that I'll buy something today just because I think I can sell it to someone who will buy it at a higher price, right? So I believe there's a lot of utility still to be built. And that's when we'll see the real power of Web3 and NFTs. And based on that, we are investing very, very aggressively in sports NFTs because we believe that they can change the entire way that fans interact with sports. And some amazing utilities can be built out using sports NFTs where the leagues, the clubs, the players, and the fans can all have a win-win and create immense value for team owners, for league administrators, for players who are able to now sell rights, virtual rights for money, which they never thought was valuable before, and for fans to interact with the game and own assets which they never knew could happen before. And so we are investing heavily into it, but honestly, the valuations are unbelievable right now. And the jury's out to see whether Web3 today is Facebook or Clubhouse, right? They both had unbelievable hype. One lived up to it in the short term, one hasn't. I mean, Clubhouse can still live up to it in the long term, but that's where I think that Web3 is today.
Harsh, Harsh, how many apes do you own?
None, actually. That's why I'm starting there saying that this stuff is too expensive for a Marwadi.
Founder of Dream 11, multi-unicorn sports. How can you not have some apes? Come on, man.
I have one in the mirror. That's enough.
No, but it sounds like you're very bullish on like the prospect and the capabilities of Web going forward in the future, but not really that big a fan of the speculative nature of buying ape NFTs and probably selling them for a profit in a couple of months' time. So
I think we're talking to CBS, right? So I think you guys should understand most of all that anyone who gets into anything and invests into it because they think that someone else is going to buy it for more, right, is in for trouble in almost any industry, right? There has to be underlying value that you can derive out of the asset you buy, not just counting on someone else to buy it off you for a higher price. The minute you get into that, it's never in any industry ended in roses, right?
Yeah. With that, maybe let's come to Rohit and switch topics a little bit and try and understand what venture raising is like, what capital raising is like, especially for I ask you especially because you sort of started in the enterprise space when it was not hot, like you said. How does that process look like, especially for young entrepreneurs and student entrepreneurs right now? What would you advise them in being able to choose the right partners, how to go about actually thinking about raising capital?
Yeah, so I think initially we had a tough time because as I said, right, I think the model that is followed and most of the VC industry is generally followers, right? Like there are good folks who lead the way, but most of them are followers and nobody was investing in Asia SaaS or India SaaS at that point, right? Enterprise SaaS, or we said we will lead from here and not do US directly, etc. Which we didn't know, honestly, right? Like when we started off, that was something that we were completely ignorant to, that, oh, there is this angle, right? Like it's not just enough to make revenues and all of that. It should look good enough to, right, like look like a large company, or the TAM question, etc. I think over time, right, we've been able to stick our neck out and say, hey, we'll be doing this, and most of our VC conversation started like a year before, where we were in touch with them, etc. It was not a process, but like most of our investors, we already had built relationship with, right, where we learned from them in the process, and all of that, we got to know them better as well. And at every point, we were able to say that we will do this by the end of the year, and we were able to do that, right? I think we were valued because of the execution consistency we were able to show over time. And that's because, one, we were doing something different in terms of Asia SaaS, right, leading with Asia. Two, it was also a very crowded market, right? Like HR tech existed a lot more, I mean, for the last 30 years, and it's just growing. But for category creators, I think in terms of new to the world, right, like I'm sure when Harsh spoke about sports, or when Aakrit spoke about conversational AI and all of that at different points of time when it was not there, right? It was not mainstream in a way, right? It's a different problem statement. But the good thing for the audience is that you just need one person to believe, right? Like in terms of right, you don't need 10 people to fund you. You need just one person to fund you. So I mean, any amount of rejection is fine, right? It's not validation of your idea. It's just that somebody doesn't get it, somebody clicks with it, somebody doesn't focus on it, all of that. So I think fundraising at least is an ongoing process. Not that you have to be spending all your time there, but at least be your eyes and ears out to know who's investing, who's not, etc. So I think that part you should, I mean, somebody has to be doing that in the organization. I think at least, as Aakrit said, like I think TAMs keep expanding. If you get the right set of founders who very have a good understanding of the customer and the problems, I think they'll pivot enough. And you have two great examples of great pivots that have happened as well, right? Like they'll pivot enough to build a very large company, right? So I think that is there. I think the boldness with which, and I did want to say one thing about the Web3 bit as well. I think it's very academic at this point of time, right? Like if you look at HR, there's hazard use cases in terms of Web3, crypto, like background verification, employee data, salary information, compensation, etc. Extremely academic at this point of time. So we need to be keeping an eye out. We're just listening, we're just learning, not doing too much or not investing too much into that space.
Got it. And I think just want to bring up a couple of points that you just mentioned. And I know Aakrit and Harsh have also mentioned that in today's call. It's something that whenever I speak to entrepreneurs, the thing I tell them, you need to be ready for pivots and persistence. You know, your company that you start with initially, again, if you're married to a solution, it doesn't work. If you have that problem solving approach, then you will keep pivoting because your goal will remain constant, but your approach will keep evolving over time. And that persistence is required because you're going to face a lot of rejections. A lot of people will tell you, from investors, clients, people around you will be like, hey, maybe this is not the right idea, but you have to kind of keep going through the paces and keep believing in your idea as well. I know we are almost at time. I just quickly want to wrap it up with, you know, very quick pieces of advice that you have for students, young professionals, everyone that's listening in. Aakrit, let's start with you. Any thoughts that you would want to share from your journey that would help everyone that's tuned in today?
Look, I mean, there's a bunch of people, the intersection of doing their MBA in the US and thinking about India and other things, right? I'll just give you one. I'll leave with one parting thought. So I moved back about a little over 10 years back. I moved back in 2011 with the whole idea that 2011 seemed like it would be the decade for India tech and all of that. And if you think about it, you know, I almost sometimes joke about this, that I feel I was a decade early. You know, what in the last 5 years, there have been 3 big sort of events that have just accelerated what technology and entrepreneurship could mean in India. And these are not good or bad or whatever. These are just things that happened. First was, and in order of no priority, right? First was data prices and cost of data consumption in India going down, dramatically in 2016. And, now we are obviously everybody knows this, the highest consumption data country in the world. The second after that was a combination of UPI and demonetization, which accelerated transactions and digital adoption again. And third, which was unfortunate, but at least for tech, it was a different scene, which was COVID, right? COVID accelerated adoption of internet technology again by another few years. So if you think about all of these events coming together and sitting over here now in 2020, 2021, literally just coming out of COVID, like literally today, right? Today, I'm not sure if you guys know, but today is the day that at least the state of Maharashtra has made masks optional. So as of today, literally we're like, okay, is COVID over? There is never been a better time to build a company either for India or out of India, given these set of events that have happened over the last few years. This coming decade is absolutely going to be where the US was in 2004 or 2000 rather, and perhaps China was in 2005, 2006. So for all those who are thinking about this, about what to do next, I would definitely leave you with that factual information without any personal bias, and long on India.
Long on India, indeed, yes. Harsh, your parting thoughts?
I think with the amount of money that's flown into India in the last year or so in tech, right? I think there was some 35 billion or 40 billion or something like that. And the amount of funds that have raised money for India, even if the market today is in a bit of a downturn, which I believe it is, and it's going to be great to see some correction to some of the crazy valuations and, like literally founders having a series A of 100 million and, pre-seed and pre-series A and I don't know what not the names are now. There's like 7 rounds before you get to series A. I think all of that will stop. But I think the amount of money that's still there available and dry capital for India and dry powder is amazing. So the good companies will only get larger. And I believe with the government's strong push at, PM Modi ji saying they want to push a $1 trillion economy, with, Piyush Goyal ji saying that he wants to have 75 unicorns come out of India this year, with Make in India, with Digital India, with Startup India. I feel like the regulatory, the technology, and the entrepreneur, and the VC ecosystem and PE ecosystem, that whole concoction is an amazing mix for the next couple of years of India. And I won't be surprised if there are 3 or 4 $100 billion companies coming out of India in the next few years.
Yeah.
So I think my advice to anyone would be that if you see yourself in India at some point in the future, and if you feel like you want to be back to India, especially for the Indians out there, don't wait. There's very little upside to working in the US for the next couple of years and then coming back to India. But if you see yourself in the US for a long time, then that's different.
Yeah. No, and we had Piyush Goyal ji join us yesterday, and he was, again, echoing a lot of what you all are saying as well, which is just heavily bullish on India and the prospect of tech actually leading that revolution as well. With that, Rohit, your parting thoughts. I know we're almost at time, so we'll make it quick.
I think I'll just echo what Harsh and Aakrit said. I think the ecosystem is also there now, right? Like when we started off in Hyderabad, I think like there were no 0 unicorns, and now there are 3, right? Like in the last 6 years. And like for a startup meetup, like everybody used to congregate in Bangalore or Delhi to have like a decent number of founders doing similar kind of things, right? Now each city in India has that ecosystem. So I think that itself, with the entrepreneurial energy, like it saves a lot of time because you learn from each other. You learn from each other's mistakes more importantly, right? So I think it's a great time to start off, as long as there's a good problem that you're going after and a good set of co-founders. I think those 2 are extremely important.
No, this has been great. I think, thank you so much, all of you, for sharing such insightful thoughts on where India is right now and where we're heading as well. I think I can certainly confidently speak on behalf of all the people joining us that everyone's very energized by the prospect of what India has to offer, not just what we've been going through right now. So thank you again for taking the time on a Saturday evening, also between a Mumbai Indians game. I know, Harsh, that that's a difficult one also. So thank you again. And
Not a happy Mumbai Indians game for sure, if you've seen the results.
no.
And then there's a Manchester United game later tonight. So let's hope those results are slightly different.
And there's the festival is going on as well, right? There's so much happening in India. You should come back.
So absolutely. On that note, again, thank you, everyone. Hopefully we'll bring you in person to Colombia next year and do everything in person next time.
Thanks, Anand.
Thank you. Thanks. Good seeing you, Rohit. Good seeing you, Harsh.
You're welcome.